long time ago, in a faraway land, I met a holy man. In preparing our annual message for our Somalia vets, of which there are many here in Arizona even, I talked this over with Bobby, my best friend in battle from Mogadishu. We live 2 blocks apart and talk like schoolgirls every day. And I ran this message by him, and he said it was probably too good not to share. Not my words, but I feel it could have a healing effect. So I prepared this, and I'm going to try to get through this in one shot. I've never shared this publicly. That's usually not a good start. But I felt that this could be way too important not to share. 28 years ago, I met a holy man in a foreign land. He and I instantly bonded over a makeshift bazaar on our base camp, Sword Base. So much so that I decided then and there to take him home with me. The event was a first-time thing on a trial basis. It was another first, a show of trust to the locals. But this bazaar would be short-lived. When the mortars started falling, the 2 armed escorts scooped up the few street merchants and easily had them outbound through the main gate. I quickly stashed the holy man in my pocket and carried the hollowed-out ostrich egg I purchased under my arm like a football, running back to the sergeant of the guard. One of the guys ran it back to our hooch and laid it on my whoopee for me. Rest in peace, Scotty Miller. And then there's this guy. I had no idea that he would be with me for the rest of my days. I call him the Holy Man, and he has faithfully studied his verse since the day we met. As fate would have it, it's also the first and only time the 3 of us were together. She laughed, comparing his baldness to her own. Some of you know about my adopted child, per se. You know, that one kid you can't help but fall in love with on a deployment and make it your mission to do everything you can for? Yeah, that one. She was only 6 years old, and her cousin, only 9 herself, was her sole means of survival and her only living relative. I gave her the majority of my rations for the first month of our deployment or so. After all, the Army wasn't going to let me starve. And it may or may not have helped to be attached to a unit that ran the Class 1 ops for the area. I still lost 45 pounds that tour. Naturally, we grew very close. My oldest boy, Gary, was home, safe, provided for, well-fed. I really felt divinely appointed with regard to this little girl. My family was, and many still do, hold it against me that I volunteered for that tour. Oddly, I just took it. I have never once regretted that decision. Hakima. That was her name. After she was killed 28 years ago now, well, the Holy Man's been tagging along with me ever since. We actually met the morning she died. And that's the day I snapped. That entire day was kind of blurry for me, and it's only gotten hazier over time. But the one thing I remember distinctly was hearing this deafening screaming, the kind that makes your ears vibrate internally. It was loud but distorted. The only way I can describe what happened next was it being very similar to your ears popping at elevation. And then at some point, my hearing returned to me all at once. Shortly thereafter, the screaming suddenly stopped. I was on my back inside our small guard shack, conveniently located on top of a perimeter consisting only of a single wide layer of mill vans. Side note, I'm pretty sure some butter bar came up with that because it silhouetted our positions nice and convenient like for the enemy, both during the day and at night. Bonus. Must be one of those lessons learnt. The reason, as it turns out, I was on my back is because it took 3 guys to pull me off the shooter. A young trigger-happy kid looking for his first confirmed. He got sent back to his home unit. Akeem and her cousin were carried off in a Blackhawk. I never saw her again. Somewhere between the starving people, multiple simultaneous pandemics running rampant, the warring clans, the battle, Mike Durant in enemy hands, all of our fallen, wounded, Mefloquin, and this. I simply could not reconcile it. Any of it. Hers was one death too many. I'm pretty sure this is where I experienced a psychotic break, which lasted 25 years. I was like a robot, barely functioning on the surface and crumbling and numb on the inside. I was discouraged as I felt I couldn't even save one single child. What confidence I had was shaken, and I doubted I could have been a decent father or husband. Shaken to my core, I spiraled downward. When those demons take root, it can be very difficult to overcome them. However, it can be done. They can whisper to you in your own ear, in your own voice, creating deception from within. And before you know it, you've isolated yourself away from everyone you love. You know, because you love them. You tell yourself that. Wrong, my friends. I was dead wrong. Many relationships have suffered over the years due to my neglect during that dark time. In fact, I have 3 grandchildren that I love very much, though we've never met. Life has consequences. And just because you come out of a dark tunnel doesn't mean everyone will be there on the other side rooting for you when you come out. But I hold myself accountable, and I don't blame anyone. I'm the prodigal son of a prodigal son. And while I do know better than to say never, but that doesn't mean it's easy by any stretch. Just when you think your tears are dried up forever, they start flowing again like the Euphrates. All the while, the holy man has remained much more patient than I. Year after year, he dutifully studies his faith. We should all be so devoted. Here we are 28 years later, and I think I may have finally figured out why I keep him around. It's the same reason I don't feel sad when I look at him. He and I were together the last time I saw her smile. I remember her laughing that contagiously youthful music that only could come from God. One that is discernible in any language. Though it's never been clear what his spiritual, textual preference he favors, I've always presumed it to be the Quran. Not to worry. Either way, we now worship together in perfect peace, the way God intended. That's how I know I've truly forgiven my enemies. And now, when my body is broken and my mind is tired, I can see that her death served a purpose, as did her life. Before she left us, she learned that even a stranger can love her with their whole heart. And she taught a rough around the edges 23-year-old American soldier that regardless of blood, loving a child is loving a child. God used her to teach me that. In retrospect, I see that was ultimately the beginning of my trusting relationship in God. It was a pain like I'd never known, but God would repeatedly refer to that tour throughout my life when he felt I was ready to learn from it. And when I was, I did. I'm starting to think the holy man just might be studying the Lord's word after all. Well played, God. Well played indeed. Yes, it was a day full of tragedy, but also one filled with miracles. Valor, bravery, and love for our fellow man covered the city like water covers the earth. And at the end of the day, I am still blessed to have loved her for the rest of her life. Amen.